He had nothing. Yet he changed everything. Long ago, in the heart of a lush and sprawling land where rivers sang and baobab trees stood like ancient guardians, there lay a peaceful village named Nyamble. It was a place of laughter, of drumming, and storytelling, where tradition ruled and wisdom was passed from tongue to ear like sacred fire. But even in this land of beauty and balance, not everyone was born equal. In a dusty corner of the village, beside the goat sheds and crumbling clay walls, lived a boy named Kweku. His name meant born on Wednesday. But the villagers whispered that he had been born under a cursed star. Kweku had no mother, no father, no siblings. Just a woven mat and a clay bowl he carried everywhere. He survived on the kindness of some and the pity of most, yet what? Kweku lacked in fortune, he made up for in curiosity. He would sit beneath the elders' council hut, listening silently to their debates. He would trail behind market women, memorizing how they haggled and traded. He studied ants carrying leaves 10 times their size. He watched, listened, learned. Where other children played, Kweku pondered. Where others mocked, he marveled. And, far above them all, in a grand palace carved with ancient symbols, sat King Agamantha, ruler of Nyamble, a man known across the land for his wisdom. But even wisdom, like a river, can run dry. The king had grown old. His advisors, once sharp, as lions' teeth, had become bloated with pride and greed. The village buzzed with rumors of betrayal, secret deals, and decisions that no longer served the people. One night, during the annual fire festival, the king made an announcement that set the village ablaze, not with fire, but with hope. "My people," he said, his voice echoing into the starry night, "I am seeking a new voice of truth, one who is untainted by greed, wise beyond years, bold enough to question, and humble enough to listen. A challenge will be held. Any soul, young or old, rich or poor, may compete. The winner shall be my new royal advisor." The crowd gasped. Some cheered. Others scoffed, but in the shadows, a pair of young eyes gleamed, like polished onyx stones. Kweku had never dreamed of palaces, but something stirred in him that night. A whisper from deep within. A whisper that said, "You are more than what they see." And so, while others laughed at the idea of a poor orphan standing among scholars and chiefs, Kweku began to prepare, not with swords or gold, but with stories, riddles, and a heart full of questions. The challenge would begin in 7 days. And what no one knew, not the elders, not even the king, was that Kweku's story was already woven into the prophecy carved into the palace walls. The one who sees without eyes will save the kingdom from its own blindness. Asterisk, asterisk, the sun rose high over Nyamble, casting golden light across the village square. For 7 days, whispers had grown like vines around the marketplace. Who would dare step forward? Who had the courage and the wisdom to answer the king's call? On the 8th morning, a large crowd gathered at the foot of the palace steps. The elders had set up wooden benches, and the royal guards stood in polished rows. Drums beat slowly, ceremoniously, as the village waited, and then, one by one, the contestants stepped forward. There was Chief Dabari's son, Okoto, dressed in fine leopard cloth. There was Mom Folu, the widow known for her sharp tongue and sharper wit. There were traders, soldiers, scholars, even a visiting prince from the next province. And finally, there was Kweku. The crowd fell into uneasy murmurs as the barefoot orphan walked up the palace steps, holding nothing but his worn-out clay bowl. "Is he lost?" someone whispered. "Someone. Send him back to the goat pens," another laughed. But Kweku said nothing. He simply stood in line, head held high, eyes fixed on the palace doors, inside the royal courtyard. King Agamon sat beneath the great mahogany canopy, flanked by his council elder Borlu, elder Sifa, and the high priest Quabani. Their faces were hard, unreadable. The king raised a hand, and silence fell. "Today," he began, "marks the first of 3 trials. These trials will not test your bloodline. They will not test your wealth. They will test your mind, your heart, and your truth. If you seek to impress with vanity, turn back. If you carry deception in your tongue, beware. The kingdom does not need flatterers. It needs vision." A low murmur of approval moved through the crowd. The first trial was called the Riddle of the Hidden Truth. Each participant was led, one by one, into the Hall of Silence, a great stone chamber with a single wooden stool, a jug of water, and a scroll. On the scroll, a riddle was written. "I have no voice, yet I speak to all. I open hearts, but carry no key. I can travel the world, yet never move my feet. What am I?" Some scratched their heads. Some wrote long, complex answers. Some tried to charm the guards for clues. When Kwiku's turn came, he walked into the hall with quiet confidence. He sat, read the scroll, and smiled. He dipped his fingers into the water, wrote a single word on the clay floor, and stepped back. The guards blinked, then bowed. "The answer is, it's a story," he said simply. "A story speaks without voice. It opens hearts. It travels through time and space, yet stays rooted where it's told." When the results were read aloud later that evening, only 5 candidates had answered correctly. Kwaku was one of them. But while the king's eyes twinkled with interest, Elder Borlu narrowed his. For in his mind, this orphan had already risen, too high as the sun set, painting the sky in fire and indigo. Kwaku walked back to his corner of the village. That night, as he lay on his woven mat under the stars, he whispered to himself, "One test down. But the true challenge is yet to come." Little did he know, forces were already moving against him. For not all wanted the kingdom's future shaped by a boy with nothing to lose. Asterix night in Niambal was often filled with laughter drums in the distance, crackling fires, and children chasing fireflies through the grass. But tonight, something was different. The village buzzed, yes, but not with joy. It buzzed with confusion, with whispers that stung like mosquito bites. Did you hear the orphan pass the riddle? Cheating, perhaps. Witchcraft, muttered a few older women. Even the market women, who once handed him scraps, now looked at Kwaku with narrowed eyes. Power, even the scent of it, could shift hearts far across the village. In a carved compound filled with silk pillows and greedy laughter, sat Akoto, son of Chief Dabari. His pride had taken a blow. "How could a boy with a bowl beat me?" Akoto snapped, tossing a mango to the ground. "I studied under royal tutors. I read scrolls from foreign lands." A thin man leaned closer. He was Elder Borlu's nephew Kwame, who had slithered his way into many years and secrets. "This orphan," Kwame hissed, "is more dangerous than he looks. He threatens your rightful place." Akoto scoffed. "He threatens nothing. He'll be crushed in the next test." Kwame's eyes glittered. "Perhaps. But if he's not, we'll have to ensure he fails, even if it requires a little help." The next morning, the second trial was announced, the test of justice. This time, the remaining 5 candidates were brought into the judgment hall, large, circular chamber, built with red stone, engraved with symbols of truth, balance, and tradition. Each candidate was given a single case, dilemma drawn from real village disputes, and asked to judge it fairly. The first case was brought before Kwaku. 2 women, both crying, stood before him. One held a baby in a wrapper. The other claimed the baby was stolen. They had no husbands, no witnesses, just their word and tears. Kwaku listened carefully. The hall watched silently, eager for his failure. Instead of questioning them endlessly, he did something strange. He asked for a drum. The guards frowned, but the king allowed it. Kwaku gave the drum to the woman holding the child. "Drum for us," he said. Confused, she tapped a simple rhythm. Then Kwaku turned to the second woman. "Now you drum." She did her rhythm softer, trembling. Finally, he held the drum himself and sang a lullaby. He remembered his mother humming long ago. The child stirred in the first woman's arms, but turned its head at Kwaku's voice and reached its hands toward the second woman. Gasps filled the chamber. Kwaku turned and spoke calmly. The child does not recognize the arms that hold it, but it remembers the song of its mother. This woman is the true mother. Even Elder Sepha stood, stunned. The king smiled deeply, but from the corner, Elder Borlu's jaw clenched like a trap. When the trials ended that day, 4 contestants remained. But that night, as Kwaku walked home through the tall grass, he heard a rustle. Then a whisper. "You're clever, boy," the voice said. But clever mouths get silenced. A rock flew past him, then another. He ducked and ran. Someone didn't want him to reach the final trial, and he was starting to realize this wasn't just a game of wisdom anymore. This was war. Asterisk, asterisk. The village of Niambal awoke to a restless wind. The skies were unusually overcast, as though the heavens themselves were holding their breath. Word spread quickly. Only 3 contestants would advance to the final trial. Kwaku sat by the stream. That morning, washing his face and staring at his reflection, the once lonely boy was now the village's most talked about name. But fame, he had learned, carried not just praise, but danger as he dipped his hands into the cool water. A shadow loomed behind him. It was Mom Folu, the sharp-witted widow and one of the final contenders. She sat beside him with a sigh. "I saw the stone thrown at you last night," she said softly. Kwaku looked away, pretending he hadn't noticed. "This village," she continued, "doesn't like when the unexpected rises, especially from the mud." Kwaku smiled faintly. "They don't fear me, they fear change." Mom nodded. "They also fear truth. And the truth is, you have something they can't buy: wisdom without pride." He looked at her, surprised. "You think I have?" "A chance." She gave a sly grin. "I think you already won. The question is, will they let you?" That night, the king invited the remaining 3 candidates, Kwaku, Akoto, and Mom Folu, to a private dinner in the royal garden. It was meant to be a celebration, a peaceful evening before the final trial. The garden was filled with glowing lanterns, fragrant blossoms, and the gentle hum of crickets. Kwaku, unused to luxury, sat carefully on the edge of the mat. He picked his food slowly, watching the other 2. Akoto drank heavily, boasting of his travels and future power. Mom Folu asked sharp questions to the king. Making the council squirm, Kwaku said little. But as he reached for a roasted yam, he noticed something odd. The flavor was bitter. His fingers tingled slightly. Then, his head began to feel light, very light. His vision blurred. Voices became muffled. His heart pounded in his ears like tribal drums. And then, everything went black. He awoke in the healer's hut, the scent of crushed herbs filling the air. Beside him sat the king. "You were poisoned," the old man said quietly. Kwaku tried to sit up. His body ached. "I suspected someone might try." The king continued. "So I had the healer watch all your meals." The boy blinked. "Why me?" "Because you are dangerous," the king said. "Not because of your actions, but your potential. You threaten everything they've built." Kwaku's mouth was dry. "Then why let me compete?" The king smiled sadly. "Because I serve truth, and truth sometimes comes wrapped in rags." He stood to leave. Rest, tomorrow is the final trial. If you can stand, you can compete. Alone again, Kwaku stared at the ceiling of straw and wood. They had tried to end him. Silently, cowardly, he closed his eyes, not in fear, but in quiet, steady rage. This was no longer about a title. This was about justice, and he would not stop until it was served. Asterisk. Asterisk dawn arrived with a hush over Nyam Bali. Not a rooster crowed, not a drum echoed. Even the trees seemed to whisper it was the day of the final trial. Kwaku rose slowly, still weak from the poison, but more determined than ever. The healer offered a cane. He refused. He would walk with pain before he let his enemies think he had been broken. At the palace gates, crowds pressed in silent tents. Everyone knew something had shifted. The villagers had heard rumors, poison, betrayal, secrets. Some now looked at Kwaku with curiosity, others with awe. The king entered the judgment hall first, his golden staff tapping with every step. The council followed Delder Borlu's eyes cold, his hands clasped a little too tightly. The three finalists stood in line. Kwaku, barefoot Maa me. Folu, calm and wise. Akoto, smirking in royal silk. The king raised his voice. This final trial is unlike the others. Today, you must face not a riddle, not a dispute, but yourselves. You will each stand before this court and answer one question. He turned, eyes sharp. What is the greatest threat to this kingdom? Gasps rippled through the room. This was no ordinary test. The future of Nyambol could hinge on this very answer. Akoto stepped forward first. His voice was loud, proud. The greatest threat, he declared, is ignorance. Our people need stronger borders, more education, more discipline. We must strengthen our armies and enforce stricter rules. Some elders nodded. The crowd was divided. Next came Mom Falu. Her voice was calm, steady. The greatest threat, she said, is forgetting who we are. Our people chase foreign ideas and riches while our traditions rot. If we do not protect our roots, the tree will fall. The elders murmured again. A few clapped softly. Finally, it was Kwaku's turn. He stepped forward, thin, bruised, barefoot and stood tall before the king. His voice was quiet, but it carried across the stone hall like a ripple on still water. The greatest threat, he said, is unchecked power. A hush fell over the room. He continued, when those with power surround themselves with flatterers, not challengers. When truth becomes inconvenient, when justice is bent to protect the powerful. He looked directly at Elder Borlu. Then the kingdom begins to rot from within. Murmurs grew. Elder Borlu's hands twitched. Kwaku turned back to the king. Nyambol is rich in soil, in stories, in spirit. But if we let power become a wall instead of a bridge, if we silence the questions, then no soldier or tradition will save us. The king sat back, his eyes distant, deep in thought. Then, without a word, he raised his staff. A loud boom echoed as it struck the floor. I have heard enough, he said. He looked to his council. Leave us. Elders hesitated. Even Borlu paled. But the king did not repeat himself. The council filed out, one by one, and as the doors shut behind them, the king leaned toward. Kwaku, you speak dangerously. And truthfully, he said. Then, after a long pause, tomorrow, you will sit beside me. Asterisk, asterisk, the following morning, the village square overflowed. From neighboring villages, traders, elders, and warriors had come. Word had spread far and fast. The king had chosen the orphan. Drums thundered through the sky like rolling clouds. The sun rose slowly, painting the palace in gold. Inside the throne room, King Agumon prepared for the ceremony that would make Kwaku the youngest royal. advisor in the history of Niambo. But shadows still lingered. Elder Borlu had not spoken a word since the final trial. He had locked himself inside his compound, where candles burned through the night, and whispers passed through cracked windows like wind through dry grass. He had spent decades manipulating power, planting loyal advisors, twisting laws in his favor, and now a barefoot orphan threatened. It all he could not allow it. Inside the palace, Kweku knelt before the king. He wore no crown, no robe, only the same cloth from his village corner. But in his eyes burned something deeper than gold. The king raised his golden staff by the wisdom of our ancestors. He said, "In the truth of your trials, I name you Kweku-san of Niambo, voice of the people, and my royal advisor." The hall roared. Kweku stood, trembling slightly but steady. Just then, a guard burst through the doors. "Sire, a snake." In the throne room, gasps erupted. Behind the throne, a black cobra had slithered, encoiled, poised, venom dripping from its fangs. The crowd panicked. Some ran, some froze, but not Kweku. He stepped forward slowly, calmly. He knelt eye to eye with the snake. Then, he did something unthinkable. He removed the clay bowl from his belt, held it steady, and whispered, "Even the serpent fears wisdom more than swords." The cobra hesitated, then slowly slithered into the bowl. Kweku stood and turned to the guards. "Release it beyond the village. Even it deserves freedom." The hall stood still. Then the king laughed a deep, thunderous laugh. "Your final trial," he said, "was not of words, but action, and you, my son, have passed it with the grace of a king." That night, the kingdom celebrated, but far from the lanterns and music. In a hidden chamber of the palace, Elder Borlu met with 3 shadowed figures. "He's more dangerous than we thought," Borlu said. One of the figures hissed, "Then we shall not fail again." And in the darkness, a new plot was born. Because power never surrenders quietly, and Kweku's greatest trial was yet to come. Asterisk, asterisk. A week passed. Kweku now sat beside the king during all meetings. His words soft but sharp, his insights gaining both respect and quiet resentment. The villagers were divided. Some praised him as a gift from the ancestors. Others called him a puppet or worse, a threat to tradition. And in the palace corridors, whispers moved faster than guards. One afternoon, while reviewing disputes from distant provinces, Kweku stumbled upon something odd in a scroll, a record of royal taxes paid to a village that no longer existed, Kwanzaa, a settlement destroyed by fire over a decade ago. He paused. Why were coins still being sent there? He brought the scroll to the king, but Elder Borlu interrupted. "That's not your concern, boy. It's an old agreement." The king frowned. "Let the boy speak." Kweku bowed. "Your Majesty, someone is funneling gold to a ghost village." "Perhaps? Someone who counted on no one reading the ledgers." The king's eyes narrowed. "I want every scroll from the treasury examined," he said. Tonight, Borlu's lips tightened. That evening, Kweku sat alone under the moonlight. The fireflies buzzed gently around him, but he felt no peace. Mom Folu approached, carrying 2 bowls of millet porridge. "You're digging deep," she said. "And the deeper you go, the more dangerous it becomes." Ku took the bowl, grateful. "The truth is buried under years of silence, but I'll keep digging." Mom looked into the distance. "The king trusts you, but not all the council does." Dulu. "He is like a snake that doesn't hiss." Kweku nodded. "I can feel him watching." "Planning?" Mom leaned in. "You need to know something. Something I never told anyone." He looked up. She whispered, "I knew your mother." Kweku froze. She was a servant in the palace. Years ago. Brilliant. Kind, too clever for her own good. She uncovered something. Something the council wanted buried. One day, she vanished, and weeks later, you were found. Kweku's breath caught. All this time, I thought I was nothing. Mom shook her head. You are not nothing. You are the storm they feared and hoped would never come. Later that night, Elder Borlu met with the same shadowed figures. He held the scroll Kweku had exposed. He's found the ledgers, he hissed. He's getting too close. One of the figures removed his hood. It was the high priest Kwabena. If we cannot poison him, he said coldly, then we must destroy him with truth. Back in his quarters, Kweku stared at the stars. Who was his mother? Why was her name erased? What did she uncover? The answers were out there, and he was closer than ever. But in the shadows, his enemies sharpened their knives not to silence him, but to expose his deepest secret. Morning crept over Niambul, but peace did not follow it. The palace buzzed. With tension, servants whispered in corners. Guards exchanged glances. The king had ordered a full investigation of the treasury, and for the first time in years, dust-covered scrolls were being unrolled. Records revisited, secrets stirred. Kweku barely slept. He pored over every page, every inked coin trail, every signature. And then, he found it, buried under layers of faded tax ledgers. In a folder labeled MISC, Settlements, Royal Exemptions, was a name written in delicate, looping ink. Essie of Kwanzaa, protected beneficiary by order of Elder Borlu's heart. Stopped.esi, that was his mother's name. Beside it, one child under her care, unknown paternity. Protection revoked. All records sealed by Royal Council. He felt the world tilt under his feet. .esi. His mother hadn't simply vanished. She had been silenced, and someone had hidden him away like a stain. He rushed to the king's chamber. Scroll in hand, the guards let him through immediately. Kweku laid the scroll before the king. This is what they've buried, said. My mother's name, her protection, her silencing. The king's face hardened as he read. This, I never approved this. This seal, he tapped the royal wax, was forged. Kweku looked into his eyes. I need to know the truth. Your Majesty, who was she protecting me from? The king hesitated, then whispered, Your mother served here when I was a younger man. She was brilliant. She challenged Borlu, and she uncovered that royal gold was being stolen, laundered. Through ghost villages. He paused. She came to me. I told her I'd act. But before I could, she disappeared. Kweku's voice was low, and the child she carried me. The king looked down. We feared you would be targeted too. The records were sealed too. Keep you hidden. I thought you died with her. Kweku felt cold. So, I wasn't just an orphan. I was a secret. That afternoon, a crowd gathered in the palace square. A public hearing had been called, but it was no ordinary council. Borlu and his allies were prepared as Kweku stood beside the king. Elder Borlu stepped forward with a scroll of his own. He held it high. This boy, he announced, is the product of treason. His mother conspired against the council, and now her son poisons our throne. Gasps rang out. He is not a royal. He is not of noble blood. He is a plant, a liar, a boy of dirt pretending to speak for gold. Eyes turned toward Kweku. Murmurs began to swirl. The king stood, voice like thunder. Silence. He looked at Kweku. You do not need blood to be royal. You need truth. And this boy knows this man has revealed more corruption in 2 weeks than my council has in 20 years. He turned to Borlu. Elder Borlu, you are stripped of your title. The crowd gasped. Borlu's face twisted in rage. You sighed. With him, a gutter-born trickster. The king raised his staff. he is my advisor. And the next breath you speak in this hall will be your last as a free man." Guards moved. Borlu was seized, and just like that, the kingdom trembled. For the first time in decades, the stone of Niambo cracked, not from age, but from truth. The news spread like wildfire. Elder Borlu had been arrested. Some wept out of disbelief. Others cheered out of long silenced hope. For the first time, the people of Niambo saw that even the untouchable could fall. And that, perhaps, justice still lived. But Kwaku didn't celebrate. He stood on the palace balcony that night, looking out over the quiet rooftops of the village, 1,000 tiny fires flickering below. The weight of truth sat heavy on his shoulders. He had uncovered not just corruption, but his own past. He now knew his mother had been silenced for protecting him, that he'd been hidden, not abandoned, and that his voice was not only his, was hers. Two behind him, the king stepped forward quietly. "You have done what few men in power ever do," the king said. "You've risked everything for truth." Kwaku turned to him. "And the truth almost destroyed me." The king nodded. "It always does." Then, after a pause, he added, "There is something else. Something I kept even from the council." Opened a carved wooden box and pulled out a small pendant circular, made of gold and ivory, marked with an ancestral crest. "This," he said, "belonged to your mother. She left it with me the night she disappeared. She told me, if her child survived, this would one day find its way back to them." He placed it in Kwaku's hands. Kwaku stared at it, eyes full. "She believed in you before you even spoke a word." The next morning, the king addressed the people of Niambo from the palace steps. The entire village gathered, some on rooftops, some holding children, all watching with breath held. "My people," the king began, "Niambo has long been ruled by tradition. But tradition without truth is like a drum with no skin, empty and forgotten." He motioned to Kwaku. "This young man, once mocked, beaten, and left in the shadows, has reminded us of what truly makes a kingdom strong: wisdom, courage, and humility." He turned to Kwaku. "You do not rule by bloodline. You guide by purpose. And today, I name you not only my advisor," he stepped back, "but my heir." Gasps, cries, applause. Some cheered. Some wept. Others stood stunned in disbelief. But all listened as the king raised Kwaku's hand and shouted, "Let this day mark a new dawn for Niambo, for justice, and for every child born under a forgotten star." Kwaku stood silently, looking over the sea of faces. And for the first time, he did not feel like an orphan. He felt like a torch lit by pain, fueled by purpose, and carried not just by fate, but by choice. Asterisk. The days that followed were like none Niambo had seen in generations. Where fear had once ruled the palace halls, now flowed transparency. Where corruption had rooted in silence, now bloomed conversation. And at the center of it all stood Kwaku no longer the barefoot boy with a clay bowl, but a young leader with the fire of 1,000 stories in his soul. His first order as royal heir and advisor: open the council to the people. He created a weekly forum where villagers, farmers, hunters, potters, children could speak their truths in the same hall where elders once ruled unchallenged. Some scoffed, others protested. But when a 10-year-old girl from the goat shed suggested a new way to store water that saved the village from a drought, even the doubters went silent. Wisdom, they learned, did not only sit in age. Kwaku also introduced something that made even the king blink: the Festival of Forgotten Names, a yearly day where the names of those erased by history would be spoken. Allowed servants, victims, mothers like Essie. On that day, the people gathered in the marketplace, lighting lanterns and singing lullabies once silenced. Kwaku stood before them and said, "We will no longer bury truth with silence. We are the children of dust and drum, of story and star. We will remember what they tried to erase." The people wept. For their ancestors, for their lost ones, for themselves. But not all hearts changed, far beyond Nyambul's borders. Displaced. Allies of Elder Borlu banished traitors, exiled priest, watched with venom in their eyes. "He's soft," they hissed. "He listens too much. He opens too many doors." Plans began to form. Enemies plotted in the shadows, weaving alliances. In secret, because though Kwaku had won the hearts of the people, there were those who only respected fear. Late one evening, as Kwaku walked through the fields with Mom, Falu, he paused beneath the baobab tree where he once sat alone as a child. "This is where I used to imagine being someone," he said. She chuckled. "Now you are someone." He shook his head. "No, I'm everyone." The hungry child, the silenced voice, the one no one believed in. Mom Folu smiled. "Then lead like that, K, and no one will ever forget your name, but as the moon." Rose, a rider, entered Nyambul cloak torn, breath ragged. He collapsed at the palace gates. "Your Majesty?" he gasped, looking to Kwaku enemies. Forming in the east, old council members, they're building an army. The guard turned pale. Kwaku stepped forward. "War?" The rider nodded. Double quotes, "They come not for gold, but for you." Asterisk, asterisk, the alarm spread before dawn. Torches blazed across Nyambul's watchtowers. Horns wailed like wounded animals. Children were gathered. Elders were led to safety. The peaceful rhythm of village life was broken now, replaced by the pounding heartbeat of war in the palace. Kwaku stood before the royal war table, eyes locked on a map of the eastern hills. "They're gathering at the old borders," reported General Asay, a grizzled warrior loyal to the king. Over 200 men. Former soldiers, merchants with grudges, priests with poisoned tongues. All followers of the fallen Elder Borlu. Kweku's hands tightened into fists. "They want to restore the old ways," the general continued. "Control through silence. Gold over justice." The king, now slower with age, looked at Kwaku. "We can still send messengers, offer peace." But Kwaku shook his head. "They don't want peace," he said. "They want submission." He looked at the soldiers. "Then, we'll give them something they never expected." The next day, a meeting was called not of warriors, but of villagers, farmers, blacksmiths, teachers, storytellers. Kwaku stood in the square. "We are not trained for war," he said, "but we are trained in truth. And truth is a weapon greater than steel." He assigned tasks not all to fight, but to protect. The blacksmiths created shields from farming tools. Women wove hiding spots from market. Basket's children were taught how to sound alarms with drum patterns. And most surprisingly, Kwaku himself never picked up a sword. He carried a book of laws in one hand, and his mother's pendant in the other. 3 days later, the enemy arrived. Dust clouded the horizon. Banners of the old council snapped in the wind. Their leader, a former priest named Juma, stood tall with gold around his neck and venom in his voice. He shouted toward the gates, "Hand over the boy. Return the throne to wisdom." From atop the walls, Kwaku replied, "Wisdom isn't something you wear. It's something you live." Juma laughed. "Then die with your wisdom." And the siege began. For 3 days and nights, the battle raged. But it wasn't like any other war. The villagers fought with rhythm signals through drums, misdirection in chants, distractions through flutes. Kweku's forces didn't just defend, they confused, disoriented, outsmarted. One night, when Juma's men tried to poison the water, they found it already drained. When they tried to burn the gates, they were led into a decoy trap. On the final morning, Kweku stepped into the field, not with armor, but with a scroll. "I offer you one final chance," he said. Juma sneered. "To surrender." "To read," Kweku replied. It opened the scroll. It listed every crime of Borlu's council, signed, sealed. Proven, he held it high. "This is what you defend: theft, lies, murder of the innocent." Then he turned the scroll, and this? He pointed to the signatures of villagers who had once followed Borlu, is who now stands with us. One by one, some of Jum's soldiers began to lower their weapons. They were not fighting for truth, only for ghosts by sunset. The war was over. Kweku returned not as a conqueror, but as a unifier. And the people sang, for peace, for justice, for the boy who outwitted a kingdom, and then saved it. Asterisk, asterisk, the sun set gently over Niambal, casting long shadows that danced like the ancestors. Spirits across the village. The war was over. The kingdom healed, and Kwekwans, an orphan with nothing but a clay bowl, had become a beacon. He stood atop the palace balcony, looking out over the land he loved. His heart was full not of pride, but of promise. Because the story of Kweku was not just about power or title, it was about wisdom. Born in silence, courage forged in hardship, and truth that could never be buried. In the days that followed, the Festival of Forgotten Names became an annual celebration. Villagers from near and far came to honor those lost, silenced, or forgotten. They sang stories aloud, stories that had once been whispered. Children grew up hearing about Kweku, the boy who changed a kingdom without a sword. And the king, now, older but wiser, often said, "True strength lies not in blood or riches, but in the courage to speak the truth even when the world tries to silence you." So, dear listener, what can we learn from Kweku's journey? That our beginnings do not define us. That wisdom is the greatest treasure, and that even the smallest voice can echo through the halls of Koshie. Only Ruby Kiss has the luxurious texture that may come with sea, and leaves a rich clod belied/long. A lull of a lion's calais that are slash lie of my/be cat, my may slash, as I play/alize, debuts Clyde/collide, a p to bad perquoid, by my rely, but my mad ebb. A bet up at we sides at it, beside my illy sunans ago at sakad side to proceed I kamisa sitits, skixtikipga ev us power and change, the course of history. Thank you for joining me in this tale of courage, truth, and hope. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share to keep these timeless tales alive. Until next time, may your heart be brave and your voice be heard. Asterisk, asterisk, thanks for watching. Hoped you liked it. If you watched till the end, please comment "end" so that we could understand you were with us till the end. As well as, please let us know, where are you watching from? Before leaving, please hit the subscribe button, comment your thought, and share with your nearest and dearest one. See you in the next one. Until to the next one, stay happy. Goodbye, asterisk, asterisk.